is one of my favorite, Tahir Shah. Hi, Tahir. I stumbled across his book in a bookstore. I was just browsing new books, and I was like, oh, this doesn't have an Anglo name. I really wanted, just some diversity in my reading. And I liked Morocco, so I picked it up and I could not put it down. I was completely enthralled by the book. And it remains one of my favorite travel books. I think Tahir is an incredible writer. And then I've read his other work too. So in Arabian Nights, I love tremendously. It's a very personal book. And, one of the things I love about that book is that, I don't know, Tahir, if you know this, but I read that while I was writing my memoir, and I got stuck in trying to figure out how to order my memoir in a way that was not so boring. And he in this book, he goes kind of back and forth between present day, his growing up. There's a lot of time jumps in the book, and that sort of back and forth was like, wait, what if I did that? And so, in one of the iterations of the book, we do that, and then actually end every chapter in my book is sort of a time jump in its own. It starts in the beginning, goes 10 years, and back and forth, back and forth. And I got that idea from Tahir. So thank you for making my memoir less boring. Today, we're going to talk about his book, The Caliph's House, and we will touch upon in Arabian Nights and a little bit too. So Tahir, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here and to be the first author of the year, which seems extra special. So thank you, especially.
You're welcome. So today, what we'll do is, I have some questions for Tahir, and then we'll open it up to everyone. So we will unmute you, and you'll be able to ask your question in chat. We want to kind of make this like, a book event in a bookstore, where there is interaction with the author. Given, the size of these events, we're able to do that, and we think it's so much fun. So I guess my first question is, you touch upon this in the book a little bit, but when you moved your family down to Morocco, did they think you were insane? I felt like, there's pushback from your wife, but I just feel like coming home, hey, I bought a house in Casablanca. We're moving there tomorrow. I thought there would be more pushback. Tell a little bit, what happens when you sprang that on your family?
The greatest thing of all with the whole moving to a haunted mansion in Morocco saga, the greatest thing of all is looking back at it in hindsight, because there were twists and turns that were very painful. But I remember it was in 2003. My daughter was 2 years old, and my son was he had just been born, actually. And we were living in London in a little apartment. And I just thought one day, I remembered my childhood going to Morocco, this land of amazing smells and spices and culture. And I suddenly became overcome with this sense that my children had to have the same thing that I had had. And so I remember saying to my wife, Rachna, I said, let's move to Morocco. Or actually, I said, we're moving to Morocco. And she said, really? Can we afford it? And I was like, yeah, of course we can. Anyone can afford Morocco. She thought I had said we're moving to Monaco, which is a whole different thing. Monaco is one of the most expensive places in the world, but Morocco certainly isn't. And I don't know, I just got a feeling back then that this was something that just had to be done. Okay, it was nuts, but I knew it could only be done if we didn't think about it too much. And I'm here as a writer, but I hope that I'm here as a traveler as well, and a nomad, because I'm obsessed with travel and nomadism. And to me, real adventure can only be happened upon if you don't second guess everything, if you don't wonder, oh, what will happen? Will it all go wrong? No, no, no. So the only way that I knew it would work or something would happen was if we just did it. We bought a haunted mansion in a shanty town in Casablanca and never looked back. And that's just what we did.
Was it difficult to find this mansion? I felt from the book, and everyone forgive me, I don't have a copy with me because mine's in my storage locker with my 700 other books, but Maria does. I felt like, you just happened to find this mansion. Like, how easy was it? And can I find one too?
Of course you can. And this is what I want to say about that in life, you have to wait for the universe to deal you the deck, that you need, or the cards you need. And I have been looking at houses in Morocco insanely and insatiably. I had looked at houses in the north, in Tangier, and down in the desert, and in the ancient city of Marrakesh and Fez, and I was getting more and more excited. The only place I did not look really was Casablanca, which is essentially a French-built city, and it's on the coast, of course. I wasn't really interested in Casablanca, and I had no knowledge of it. But then all the other houses that I was making offers on and obsessed with, and some of them were really big, they fell through one by one. And then I just got a phone call. It was back in the days of answering machines, and I got this message left on my answering machine from the mother of an old school friend. And I knew that she had a very special house in Casablanca. And actually, I had been there once for one night. I had visited years and years before, like a decade before. And I knew it was really fabulous and amazing. And she left me a message and said, would I go and look at the house? And I replied, well, of course, but I can't afford your house. And because of various things, mostly because the house was haunted with genies, as they call them in Morocco, jinoun, and also because it had a gangster neighbor, and because it was in the middle of a fully loaded shantytown. They call it bidonville in Morocco. Totally fully loaded shantytown. I cannot express how shantytownish it was enough. Because of those points, she was willing to sell it for virtually nothing. So I actually paid very, very little for it. And again, I never looked back.
So you get to Morocco, and at what point did you decide this is going to be a good book? Like, did you think of it before you went there? Did you take notes? Like, I'm always intrigued about the writing process. Like, where did this idea come from? Did you have from the get-go start scribbling notes, or how'd that work?
Well, so I'm a writer, and I've been a writer. Let me put it this way. I am unemployable. I never really had a real job. I worked as a busboy in San Diego in a shishi restaurant once for like 3 months. And that was really the only real job I had. I was an illegal busboy. But I've always written, and I wrote quite a lot of books in the 90s and the early 2000s. I had written quite a lot of books, but they were kind of adventure books. I had searched for lost cities and magic in India, and the source of King Solomon's treasure, King Solomon's gold mines in Ethiopia. So my stock in trade, if you call it that, was going on a crazy adventure. It was never about writing about my life, because that was my life, and that was far too dull. But that was my life when I was living in England. It was far too dull in a little apartment. Suddenly, living in this crazy mansion, which we only realized bit by bit that it was so haunted, supposedly, with genies, with jinn, that we'd need a grand exorcism. And we'd need, and all kinds of things went wrong. Everything went wrong. And I never, to answer your question succinctly, I did never plan. I never planned to write about it. But one night, I remember a guy, one of the workmen, because they were renovating, had fallen like 30 feet through a glass ceiling that he was climbing over. And I look back now, what was he thinking? It was a bit dirty, so he couldn't see it was glass, and he stepped through and he broke his legs. And then the police had tried to knock down the front door to arrest us all for some unknown misdemeanor. And it was just, everything was spiraling out of control. And the guardians who came with the property, like a medieval right of sale, they said it was far too dangerous to ever sleep in the house or drink any of the water, because the genies lived in the well. And when I was overloaded with all this stuff, like this mania, I remember just crawling into a heap on my bed, and suddenly it hit me. This is the greatest material I've ever had for a book. And I don't need to go to Ethiopia or India or Peru. I had all the material right there and then. And to answer your question as well, I always make notes. I'm an avid note maker. And I make notes. I even make notes on my notes. I'm one of those writers. And I usually have, I have journals and notebooks everywhere.
That's this way, Don George, and he always talks about the same thing, keeping notes just everywhere. In the book, there were a lot of cultural differences and blunders you experienced. One quote, I had broken the first rule of the Arab world: never lose your cool. How much time did it take to feel comfortable in that culture? I know you said, you grew up, you spent a lot of time there as a kid, you're Indian, so there's a lot of similarities, through that end of the world about, keeping it cool.
Matt, and I'm hoping this is something that resonates with people who are joining us today for the book club. Something that I've always found, I found it. Going somewhere on vacation or traveling through as a backpacker, as I've often done, and I had done in Morocco. I knew Morocco as a traveler, as a guy with a backpack. Being that person, and then being the person who has bought a mansion, installed their family in it, have the police knocking down the door, have genies, have all that crazy stuff. They're two very different things. And more importantly, they're two very different things about passing through a culture or a country and being there to live there. It was something that I realized instantly. It was kind of stupid of me in many ways to think that I knew Morocco. I was like the world's expert on Morocco, and I had never lived there at all. I had just visited a whole load of times. And I'd always be telling people about Morocco. And to me, the greatest thing about travel, probably, well, one of the two greatest things about travel, the other one is going home, getting home. But one of the other greatest thing about travel is the longer you spend in a place, if it's a great place, the less you realize you know about it. And if you choose a really great place like Morocco, there are so many layers, there are so many levels and permutations and possibilities. It's like a meal with a labyrinthine meal that can go on and on. And it's been, it's been just such a privilege to base myself in Morocco. Something else, can I just say this? This is what I wanted to say is that, can I just say that the reason I really decided to write about Morocco, because I had never really considered it, was this. As we all know, 9/11 happened in 2001. And by about 2003, which is when I bought the Khalifa, the Caliph's house, I had heard a lot of people in the West, whether it was in Europe or in the United States or elsewhere, saying, oh, Moroccans are Arabs, just like the terrorists. And as someone who had an affection and has an affection for Morocco, I just thought that was wrong. And so I really wanted to kind of show rather than tell, and show that Morocco is this zany kind of twilight zone of a country. It's a crossroads of culture, and it really has very, very little, nothing to do with the 9/11 terrorists and all of that. But I really wanted to show that, and that's ultimately why I wrote the book, The Caliph's House.
Yeah, I remember that was definitely a tough time, being in the States, and a lot of those general sweeping, just sweeping cultural assumptions we had at the time. Let's talk about the Guardians, right? A lot of people working for you, and at first they seem very, there's a lot of trepidation, and they didn't really seem too warm to you. How long did that take for that relationship to change? Do you still own the house? And if so, are they still Guardians?
I do still own the house. I do. And there's been a lot of change. The shanty town, and I don't mean this in some European kind of she way, but I love the shanty town. The shanty town is gone now, and it's been replaced by monstrous and expensive apartment buildings. They're all around the Khalifa. And to me, this is a strange thing to try to explain. When my kids were growing up at Dar Khalifa, and when they were small, Dar Khalifa is very big. It's got like 40 or 45 rooms, and some of them are enormous. And it's a palace, really. And outside, like 200 feet outside the walls, there were people living in shacks. And I would always tell my kids, my daughter Ariane and my son Timur, that when we were walking through the shantytown, that was reality, and that somehow we had stumbled as a family into something out of the 1001 Nights, and we were blessed and lucky. And I mean it very, very sincerely when I say that it was almost as if the shantytown was a conscience for us. And it gave meaning to the excesses of the Khalifa. The fact that there are, 15 bathrooms and, at least as many bedrooms and enormous kitchens and that sort of thing. So that was very important to me, the shanty town. And I rail on about it a lot. The Guardians, that's a strange thing. I don't know many other countries, except Afghanistan, where when you buy a house, it comes with staff who are already living there, and they were living in the stables. This is an interesting thing, that they never moved. The house had been empty for 9 years, and the Guardians never moved all that time. They never moved into the main house. And I asked them why they hadn't kind of taken their stuff and moved into the main house. And they said it was because of the genies, the bad spirits. And it was a strange thing. And to answer your question, we still have one of the original guardians. And that's really because, and the others are, you know, friends, and I'm still in touch with them. I find in Morocco, it's very normal that someone will have a job for a long time, and then because of a family duty or something somewhere else, they'll have to quit and go elsewhere. But I'm actually speaking to everyone from South Africa, from Cape Town at the moment. I'm down here for the summer, and I'm actually working on a sequel to the Caliph's House. And yeah, and I started it on Monday, and I'm really, really loving it. I've only written, I don't know, 60 or 70 pages. I'm just looking at my notes here, but it's a nice thing to be writing about the house when you're not there, because when you're there, it's so all-encompassing. You find yourself drowning in the material.
Can you give us a little hint about what the next book is going to be about?
So there's a lot at the moment. There's a lot about jinns, genies. And at the moment I'm calling it Living with Jinns. I'm really quite obsessed with jinns. And it's this. And this is why I love Morocco. And not just Morocco, but Arab countries. This idea that, that everyone believes in totally. It's not like a Hollywood fantasy of Aladdin with a blue genie and Robin Williams' voice. This is a cultural phenomenon that everyone is just totally into. And it's the idea, or Moroccans would say, the fact that God created man from clay, and at the same time he created jinns, genies, from smokeless fire. And Arabs, and particularly Moroccans, because they're so superstitious, believe that genies are all around us. You know, there's one sitting probably on my desk right here, and I might not be able to see him or her or it, but it is definitely there. That's what a Moroccan would say. And it's for that reason that almost every Moroccan, even friends of mine who are not superstitious, just culturally, for example, when they pour hot water down a sink from the kettle, they will always say Bismillah, in the name of God, just to warn the jinns that there's hot water coming. And that all means to me that it's a place where there's so much possibility. There's endless permutations of thinking and ideas, and it's one of the reasons that stories and storytelling and imagination, I think, work so well in Morocco.
It reminds me of Iceland, where they believe in elves. You know, I asked, I have a friend in Iceland, and her dad is a priest, and so obviously, they're very religious. And I said, do you believe in elves? And she goes, yeah, we have an elf little mound in our property. And I was like, well, how do you square that? She's like, well, I can't prove they don't exist. So, sort of like that double negative. Like, I don't know if they are real, but I can't prove they're not real, kind of thing. And, everybody I talked to in Iceland, like, there's a strong belief in elves for that, sounds very similar to that.
I love that kind of belief. I adore it. And even though, and actually I was just, in this new book, I was just writing about my preoccupation with genies. And I said, even though I don't really believe in them, I love to believe in them. I love suspending belief. It's just like when I go to watch, I don't know, a Marvel movie, I know it's not true, but I love pretending it's true and going along with it, because it makes life so much more interesting and fun.
I was going to ask you if you believed in jinns, but there we go. You just answered that question for me. I take the Icelandic view on it. I can't prove they don't exist, you know. So you moved your family there, and so just before we start opening up to questions, I have a couple of final ones. How do your kids feel about the whole experience? You know, I mean, how many years did they grow up there before they went back to the UK? Did they spend their entire childhood there? And, you know, do they think this is a great thing? Or do they go, Dad took us on this crazy adventure?
Yeah. So the weird thing to me is, although largely I grew up in England, except going to Morocco quite often. And the reason I was taken to Morocco in the 70s a lot, and was that my father was from Afghanistan, but he couldn't take us to Afghanistan because it was too dangerous. So he used to take us to Morocco and tell us to pretend it was Afghanistan, which was a very Afghan thing to do because it was nuts. But the good thing is I got to appreciate Morocco. And for my kids, although they travel on British passports, they didn't know England at all until they went to a boarding school in England, where I went as well, in the southwest of the country of England. And until like they were 14 years old, they hadn't spent time in England. And they had mostly been in Morocco and in India sometimes, where their mum is from. And the Khalifa it's what they know as the constant in their lives. It's something I'm so proud about. And it's more than that. It's not just the Khalifa, the Caliph's house. It's the people, the guardians who they grew up with, the maid, Zora, who is like a second mother to them. And more than anything that I'm so proud of, they've grown up with Moroccanness that that all Moroccans grow up with. It's stories. So for example, when they were eating dinner, before going to bed when they were little, sometimes Zora would feed them with a spoon, and she just loved feeding them. And she'd tell them a story, and often it was a story from the Arabian Nights. And she'd be feeding them, but as soon as they stopped eating, she'd stop telling the story. And it's just such a Moroccan, nobody grows up sitting in front of a TV in Morocco, or they didn't where we were, because this reception didn't work. And they grew up with this kind of ancient culture, and it is hardwired into them. And I'm so thankful for that and so proud of it. And it's something we talk about all the time, wherever we are.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I'm always jealous of people who got to grow up in a different culture. I taught English in Thailand, and I taught mostly to high school kids. It was like test prep so they can go to college in the States or the UK. And I just thought, what a crazy experience to be a high school, kid, expat, like third country kids are called, growing up in Bangkok of all places. Like, I was just like, man, their teenage life must be crazy. I also was like, would not want to raise my teenager in Bangkok. Yeah, I'm just going to the mall, and then they're drinking buckets on Koh San Road, with all the backpackers. Definitely some interesting experiences. So we have a lot of people here, and a lot of people who have probably lots of questions for you. So I want to open it up to everyone here to ask Tahir questions about the book, upcoming books, life as a writer, so yeah, Maria will take it from here, and she'll sort of moderate those questions.
Yeah, we have quite a few good ones. Let's get started maybe with Susan. You can unmute and ask, because it was sort of on the line of what we were talking about with his children.
Hi, thank you for letting me go first. I have to say, I first heard you speak at TravelCon a couple of years ago and never forgot your stories. So I just couldn't put down your book. I just finished it. So thank you. And Morocco's definitely on my bucket list even more, although some of it sounds a little intimidating with the different cultures and the jinns. But my question was, and then Matt brought it up right after I wrote it, but I wanted to learn more about your children and how living there shaped their views of the world and a little bit about what they're doing now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. Gosh, I think it's partly having me as a father because I'm nuts. I'm just wacko. They have grown up with stories and storytelling and more stories and this sense of crazy imagination. That's all I can call it. And I look at them now, and my son Timur is 18 and Ariane is 21, just turned 21. And they're both studying in university in England. And actually, Timur is studying Arabic, which is one of the languages of Morocco, of course. And Ariane is studying French, which is another one of the languages of Morocco. And that must have something to do with their upbringing in Morocco. But I look at them and I see the way, this is a sacred thing to me. I see the way they receive cultures where we go and countries. And I am thrilled to bits that they don't have this angst, this worry, this nervousness about new countries, partly because I've dragged them, I've dragged them all over the world since they were very young. And like when they were 3 and 5, we took a train to Tibet, and then they've met a lot of people, like, all kinds of people. And I'm very proud that they're not fazed by places, but rather very like me. They look at the entire world as this extraordinary kind of pleasure dome, this amazing experience, a place, every culture, every country has its own cuisines and stories and fashions. And it's something that is truly magical to see your children embrace the world that way. And I'm thrilled with that. And I think living in Morocco really, it seeded that in them.
It's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. There was like a dual question between Erica and Nancy Brown. So if Nancy would like to unmute and ask, I think we're all curious about where you're living now. So.
Thanks, Maria. Thanks, Tahir. What a book. This was an amazing read. The style particularly, because it was, I liked the fact that you always did like kind of a little thought and then ended it with the shortest of answers and then moved on to another topic. It was really, it always, like Matt said, didn't want to put it down. So my question is, how long did you live in Dar Khalifa? And how long did you stay there? And where are you now? I mean, I obviously back in England, according to, or maybe not, I don't know. And I'd asked Matt one thing to hear. I had asked if there was the possibility of having a picture, an image of Dar Khalifa, particularly during the renos. That must have been a horror show, but I can't even envision what that would look like.
So thank you so much, Nancy. So to answer your questions, so obviously I still have Dar Khalifa, and I'm in the last couple of years, it's been difficult to be there because of COVID, which is driving me crazy. Morocco at the moment has shut its borders, and I was just shut out. So otherwise I would have been there. And so I've come down, as I said, to Cape Town, which is a city in South Africa that I love. and it's summer and it's warm and just magical. So, and it's Africa, and I'm like an African nut. So our plan, so a year and a half ago, my daughter Ariane and I, and she is the apple of my eye, we started a charity, a foundation, and it's named after the Queen in 1001 Nights. And it's called Sherazade Foundation. Queen Sherazade was the one who told the story for 1001 Nights, as you'll probably know. And the foundation we've set up is it aims to empower women, and in particular young women, and to bridge cultures and to harness kind of the power of folklore. And our plan is to make Dar Khalifa the headquarters of the foundation. That's our plan. So, because one of the things that is slightly awkward always is that it's a really big house. And although I have masses of stuff, and I say that I use all the rooms all the time, I don't. And there are rooms living there that sometimes a year goes by without me even going in them. So I really want to use it as a way to bridge cultures and empower women and work with stories and storytelling. And to anyone who knows Morocco, Casablanca is it's this treasure trove, and I really recommend it. It's the strangest of the Moroccan cities, and it really is a city where nothing is what it seems. So I recommend it highly. I hope that answered some of your question. Thank you.
It answered some of it to hear, but I was just asking again, do you happen to have any pictures?
Oh, yes. That's why I was telling you about the foundation.
Okay.
So on the foundation's website, I'll give Matt and Maria a link. We've posted.
It's in the chat, actually.
Oh, okay. But there are pictures. There are pictures on the website of the foundation.
Okay.
The whole thing. And I'm also, another thing I'm doing, although I'm writing a sequel, I'm also doing a kind of scrapbook of Dar Khalifa, of the kids growing up there, and all the, and actually I have in this drawer next to me, I have like a gazillion pictures I printed the other day, and I've been going through them, and they're hilarious to see, to see the misery. It was so uncomfortable. That's all I can tell you. For so long, it was so miserable. And I would always get miserable looks from Rachna because nothing worked and everyone was angry. They always shouted at me. Everyone shouted at me. I don't know why.
Well, thank you very much. And I will definitely go on Shahrazad's foundation site. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. I think the next question would be awesome from Francesca. She's got a locals insight. Hello, Francesca.
Oh, does she have to unmute? I can't see her. So
I don't. Okay, Francesca. All right, we'll skip it for now. How about the question from Kevin? Kevin, would you like to unmute?
Hi, Tahir. Thanks for doing this. My question, if you could address it, what's the longest you've ever stayed in the same place? Say, since you became an adult, since you became 18, because you've traveled so much. Are you able to tell us something about that?
Thank you, Kevin. I do get itchy feet, and I find if I've been somewhere more than 2 or 3 months that I need to get on an airplane and go somewhere else. And the reason is this: it's usually because I find that the longer you're in a place, the less you see of it and you perceive of it. And in my life, I find that I have this thing that I have to look at a place, even a place like Caliph, like Morocco, Casablanca. I need to look at it with fresh eyes. And the only way to do that often, so even looking at a place where I'm based, the only way to look at it with fresh eyes is to go somewhere else and then to come back to it. And even if it's to go away for a weekend somewhere else, you know, this doesn't really answer your question, but it's a preoccupation of mine. And it is to go to the same places again and again and again. And sometimes, or when my kids were young, very little, I used to find them counting, what I call counting countries, making lists on post-it notes like this, how many countries they had been to. And I remember, I don't get angry easily, but I remember snapping at them once, and Ariana and Timo, and I said, that's not what travel is about. That's not what adventure is about. Just because you've been to Brazil and you've been to Liechtenstein, a huge country and a small country, they're not the same. And I remember saying to them, what matters is going back to places, seeing it again and again and again, and even a street corner, you know. I've traveled, for example, all over India, but the travels that I value most are going back to the same street in Kolkata, or the same, you know, market in Delhi or whatever. So it means so much to me to kind of pass that idea on, that you don't need to country count. You need to, the best way to receive cultural experiences is to keep going to the same places, get to know a few people, see them over decades, and kind of appreciate the world that way.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Great question. We have two, I think, from Jill. If Jill, you'd like to unmute.
I asked, and I don't mean this to be critical at all, because if I could write, it's the way I would think and write also. But on a scale of from 1 to 10, what is your general level of exaggeration in this and in all of your writing? And then the other question I had was if you've stayed in touch with Kamal, and if he's a friend, or if you parted ways for some reason. Those were the questions I had.
Thank you so much. So exaggeration, what I try to do is I try to look at things in a different way than they are ordinarily observed. So I have a glass here. Most people would look at that glass straight on. I would kind of turn it upside down and look at it from different angles. I would hope, as someone who's done quite a lot of stuff, that I could describe almost anything, even paint drying, but in an interesting and potentially amusing way. Something that is important to me as a writer is to make whatever I'm describing intriguing or interesting. And that's because of a duty I feel I have to the person who's reading it, whatever I've written. To be really honest, I can't stand travel books where page after page, chapter after chapter, nothing happens, and you're waiting for the payoff, and you're saying to yourself, wait a minute, I've just gone through 469 pages and I want a payoff. That's why I'm quite careful with giving payoffs, if you know what I mean, and to try to make it entertaining. I wouldn't say that I exaggerate much. In fact, sometimes I tone things down, and in some countries like India, I tone it down a lot, but everyone always seems to think that I've invented. Indians never do, though. Indians always think they know that the impossible is possible in India. And the second, I'm blanking on the second part of your question, which was Just, can you remind me?
Have you stayed in touch with Kamal? Has he become a
Yeah.
friend or?
Yeah, so, gosh, that's such a good question, and thank you for asking it. Every few years, I root him out, and I'm getting all kinds of flashes in my head here. So about a year ago, I rooted him out, and he's always at this bar that I like called Bar Atomic. I think I wrote about it somewhere. He's always at Bar Atomic, and it's from the kind of wild glory days of Casablanca from the 30s, when anything atomic in the name was like, wow, amazing. And when I rooted him out a year ago, he was wheeling and dealing. Okay, get ready for this, 'cause it's crazy. In big insects, super big beetles. He was selling them to people all over America, as I remember. And I was like, Kamal, is this the lowest that you could sink? And he said, you've got no idea, man. People pay big bucks for the big beetles. So, but you know, because I've just started writing about Dr. Khalifa again, I will make contact with him and see if he's still in the big bug business.
Awesome. Great question. Catherine, if you'd like to unmute.
Yeah, thank you. Oh my gosh, big bug business. That's too funny. So many storylines were so inspirational for me, but in particular, I loved learning or just following along as you learn more about your grandfather's final years in Morocco. I'm just wondering how that changed you, how that shifted you once you got to know him a little bit more. And thank you so much for sharing that part of the story.
Oh, look, thank you. Something that I've cherished more than anything else, I think, has been receiving letters and emails and all kinds of things, smoke signals from people who knew my grandfather. And after I wrote The Callous House in particular, and in Arabian Nights, I just got masses of messages from people who had known him. And I can't remember what I published in Arabian Nights, but some of the stories were just extraordinary. For example, my grandfather was living in Tangier at the end of his life in the 60s, and he died at the very end of the 60s. And one of the unlikely people who he got to know, or who was obsessed with him, was Timothy Leary, who of course was a pioneer of LSD. And Timothy Leary kept going over to see my grandfather. And my grandfather was apparently very unimpressed with Timothy Leary, who was hallucinating a lot. And my grandfather apparently said to Leary that, Mr. Leary, I do believe that you could get the same high by reading the work of the Sufi masters, the Sufi classics, people like Jalaluddin Rumi. So my grandfather was a great believer that you could reach this higher ground of being high by reading Sufi poetry. And another intriguing friendship that I found out about later was my grandfather's best friend in the last few years of his life was an American actor called James Coburn. And James Coburn, who was really famous in the 60s, at the same time as kind of, the early James Bond movies, that sort of mid and late 60s. James Coburn was making spaghetti westerns over in Almeria, Spain. And he came to Tangier across the straits to find an eastern savant, and he bumped into my grandfather, and they became close friends. And actually, James Coburn last week, his memoir of his life called Dervish Dust was published, and he's written about my grandfather. And it was very, very sweet to kind of see a little unlikely snippet of you know, of my grandfather's life there. And I don't know, I find that, I don't know how to describe this. Being in Morocco, always to me, the most unlikely people and situations and, I don't know, objects present themselves to me, and particularly relating to my grandfather. And that's always been the greatest delight. It's been something I treasure, as I say.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've got maybe time for one more question. I see there's a pretty good one. What are the places in Casablanca that you return to again and again? Sorry, Ruby, just mindful of time. If you don't mind just answering that really quickly.
You know, and actually today in this book that I'm writing about Casablanca, I said, I described something, and I said this. I said, when you go to travel in a place or go and live in a place, often it takes many visits or even years before certain experiences or opportunities present themselves. And you just have to wait and believe and, you know, do the time. And what I found at Casablanca is that certain people and places have presented themselves to me, but after years of living there. And there are two that I wrote about today, and I'll mention them. One is that, and this seems so odd to me even now, very close to the Khalifa, like within a mile or so, there is a Mexican convent, a nunnery, and it's been there for decades. And it's very strange because Morocco is all about Islam and everyone's really into Islam. And the reason all us or people like me are obsessed with the convent is they make the best Mexican food in the world and they sell it, and particularly tortillas and sopes and other stuff. And we go there the whole time. I always ask them, why are you here? This is crazy. Nobody wants to be converted. They love being Muslim. And the little nuns who are usually from Oaxaca, they always say to me, we are here to pray for the souls of the Moroccans. And they're not trying to convert. And another place that I only found after years and years, and it's also has a Christian connotation, is the Christian cemetery down near the lighthouse. It is the most extraordinary place in the city of Casablanca that all the French, it's a Catholic cemetery. The French built Casablanca, the modern city of Casablanca, and all of the people who built it are buried in this cemetery in huge Art Deco mausoleums. And it's just the craziest, wackiest, zaniest thing. It's kind of in the middle of town now, and I've befriended the guardian, so I get admitted whenever I like. And there's something that I'll just mention there, if anyone goes there, that I was writing about today. One of the tombs, I wish I could conjure the picture for you. One of the tombs is very, very large, and it has a statue of a young man and his motorcycle. And it's just made out of kind of, I don't know, it's just made out of clay or something, but it's very elaborate and very beautiful, the statue. And it's built into the tomb, and it tells the story, and he's there with his helmet, and it tells the story in French of this boy who lost his life at the age of 18 by being killed in a motorcycle crash. But it's very, very moving, and it's really kind of my sacred place in Casablanca, outside the house. So I always, whenever I'm in Casa, as we call it, Casa, I make a beeline for it. I love it there. Yeah.
Thank you so much for answering everyone's questions. Matt, do you have anything to wrap up before I say the last few words?
No, I think, this has been wonderful. Tahir, thank you so much for joining us and, sharing your book with us and coming to talk about your book and, spending an hour with us, geeking out on travel and all things book related. Little virtual round of applause for Tahir.